Hello and welcome to Silver Filers. My name's Emily Overton. I'm also known as RM Girl. Today, a brilliant guest who I'm inviting on, who has not recently won an award. Um, I have the lovely Sarah Armstrong Smith. I invite Sarah today as through our mathematical equations, we discovered she has enough experience years to be on Silver Filers, and I'm not sure whether she's enjoying that concept. Um, but the reason why I wanted to bring her in today is she is a woman in security. And I think it's very poignant to really say that, point it out, going, look, there's these amazing women that have been in security for over a certain amount of time. Pay attention to them. So yeah, welcome, Sarah.
Emily. Yes, I have to say I'm a little bit perturbed by the how many years you have to have racked up to be on your show. I was trying to hide my age. It's not working very well.
And I think the main thing to say here is that it was never really about age. It was just about experience and the fact that I have 15 years experience and I don't qualify for my own show, basically. Um, and I wanted to say is that, when I get to 25 years, I'll be only 42. So it's not the fact you're an old fossil or anything. Um, you'll be glad to know. Is that you just happen to, when you add in your time in fraud, is that you do qualify. So I'm very excited to have you.
Thank you.
So obviously I know who you are, but not everyone watching will know who you are. So could you kind of give a synopsis of who you are, where you've come from, what is it you do, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, hello everyone. Sarah Armstrong Smith. I'm Chief Security Advisor at Microsoft. So really what that means is I liaise with enterprise customers across Europe, really at C-suite level, trying to understand what the challenges are, what's keeping them up at night. And I suppose given the fact we're talking about silver filers and the 20 odd plus years of experience.
How many?
So over that time period, it's really covered fraud, as we said, business continuity, disaster recovery, cybersecurity, data protection, and privacy. So quite varied, let's say, over that timeline.
Yeah. So when you said 20 something years, how many?
26.
So what year has that got us back in?
1995.
1995, yes. And when you entered into this world in 1995, did you realise what you were getting yourself into?
Oh no, 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 no. So I think I left college, I didn't go to university,
Okay.
and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I found myself working at a fleet management company in a fraud department, and I was working on fraud on fuel cards. Yes. And I have to say, I absolutely loved the job because it gave me lots of power. When I was only about 21, yeah, 20 something. But it was just a fantastic job, fantastic team. Really got to get some really meaty cases. And this was really, as I sort of saying, is about stolen cards, lost cards, bringing together prosecutions to go to court and those type of things. But we had some really big meaty cases as well. So I worked in there a couple of years, but it didn't really pay the bills. Hence
Why you left?
why I moved to do a different job. Well, I kind of like, as I said, I kind of forgot that fraud was kind of part of security and compliance and that kind of thing. That's why I can't do math, obviously.
Fair enough. I mean, math isn't my strongest point either. So it did take me a while to work out some of the people. I was just like, if they started in 1980, that means they've got 20 years? No, that 1980s is a lot longer than that. So when you start talking about the 1990s, it just feels like 10 years ago. Mm-mm. Um, you
No,
know,
it's amazing to think we're like 21 years into the noughties. Is it noughties, teens? I don't know what we call them now.
oh, we're back in the tens now, so we're going to live back through the 20s again, aren't we?
Wait,
No,
oh, they were
the
the 20s.
20s.
Yeah.
Get
Oh,
out your flapper dress, Sarah.
the 1920s.
Yeah, it's like 20. Yeah, the 2020s. So we're going back through the 20s again. And we need our flapper dresses out. So we've talked about your first job and you didn't go to university. Did you have a plan to originally go to university, or did you just it was it never for you?
I didn't, like I said, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I think there's a lot of pressure under young people to think about what their career plan's going to be, and I don't really know how that's feasible considering you've never worked. So how do you know what you want to do? But one of the things I really loved was art. And I just had the most amazing art teacher who really was about use your imagination, just paint these massive pictures and all of these type of things. So I thought I'll do something with art. And when I went to college, I did a art foundation. So I originally was intending to go to be a graphic designer. So I was going to go on to university to do graphic design, but that didn't quite work out because when I went into college, my teacher at college was the absolute opposite of the teacher I'd had at school. He's like, don't use your imagination. You paint what you see. You paint bottles over and over again. And he just kind of killed my creativity. So at that point, I was just like, oh, I can't be bothered now. So I had my psychology, A-level sociology. I dropped art in the end. And then I just decided I didn't want to go to university. And I tried going straight into the workforce.
Oh wow.
Yes, I
Part of me
completely
was
killed
like,
my passion off.
part of me is kind of like, how dare he kind of cap your art fever, but also if he hadn't, then we wouldn't have you now. So,
It's interesting how things pan out, really.
mm,
But I think and that's why I sort of say I actually start my clock officially in 1999. And I think at that point, I didn't really have a career. I didn't really know what it was I wanted to do. But it was two kind of opportune moments that happened at exactly the same time. At this point, I was started working at Thames Water, and I was asked to volunteer to work on this big new program that was coming out, which is actually the Millennium Bug, year 2000, which I think is where quite a lot of people actually started their IT career. And my role really at the time was very much around what tests had to be done on the IT systems at the stroke of midnight. And I was like, but we're a water utility company, you know, people rely on water, very, very heavily regulated. You know, it's not just about the IT systems. What if people can't get access to water? How do we know who special needs customers are? How do we get people to work? How do we keep the call centers up and running? And what I didn't know was this is business continuity. I didn't even know business continuity was a subject. It just, to me, just felt like common sense. It's like, why we're only looking at the IT systems, but there's a whole other area that needs to be looked at. And I just felt, to me, I just loved it. And then when someone said to me, this is actually a thing, this is business continuity, and I'm like, bang, that's my career sorted. So, and the other thing that happened as well at the same time as was, as I say, Thames Water were putting people through management courses and sponsoring them to go back to college, to do a year's course. And I just think this was the best thing ever. And I was all bright-eyed, bushy-tailed going into college. And again, sort of being early 20s. And I thought, this is amazing. My companies are sponsoring to do this. I've got this new project, new career. And when I first started at college, I was the youngest person, but also only one of two women. And I had this guy there, and he was a real bully, really horrible. And he was probably like double my age, but he wouldn't let me have an opinion. And I think his company, he'd be like, I've been a manager 20 years, don't tell me how to manage, that kind of thing. And I was never allowed to have an opinion. He belittled me, put me down all the time. And this went on weeks after weeks after week. And to one point, he just turned around in front of the entire class. He said, why don't you just shut up, little girl? And I just looked around the room and I was like, nobody stood up for me, not even the tutor. And I just kind of like sank into my chair. And in the break, people were coming up to me, I can't believe that man spoke to you like that. Oh my God, oh my God. I said, why didn't you say anything? Nobody said anything to me. And I said, no, if one person had stood up and said, you know, how dare you speak to somebody like that? And I kind of had this moment, if you like, and I thought, well, I have a choice. So I think, am I going to allow this person to treat me like this? Or am I going to stand up for myself because nobody else is? And I kind of had that bit of an FU moment. and it's almost like I kind of had this shell. I hardened up like, literally overnight. And I was like, how dare you? How dare you speak to me like that, treat me like that? I have every right to be here, have an opinion. But there's a kind of thing that made me just feel I don't want anyone to be in that position again. And I don't want anyone that I'm with to feel like that. And so I kind of, as I sort of said, I grew this shell and this little bit
And
come out.
a
And I was like, I'm going to challenge. I'm not going to have anyone say no to me. And I'm having an opinion, and I will say what I want to say. And that kind of and it was just like, I'm not going to have somebody kill my creativity again. I'm so happy. I'm so pleased that I'm at this point. And I thought, this just feels like repeat, of this person at college and his tutor. I'm like, nope, not again. And it's almost like it was a defining moment. And that's why I always say my career started in 1999, even though I'd had those years of experience before. That for me was, this is my career, this is what I'm going to do. And that's kind of from that point to now is how I've built my career.
So, did you come up against him again? Like, did he ever say anything more to you?
I just never let him get to me, because I think when he cut across me, I went quiet. And I just thought, at this point, I'm not being quiet anymore. I'm going to stand up for myself. I'm going to have an opinion. But I think at that point, other people then started to have an opinion as well. And it just came across as being a bully. And I remember telling this story X number of years later when I was at Fujitsu, and this guy came up to me at the end. He goes, I'm that man, not literally. And he goes, I cannot believe. I said, I was brought up to be a man's man. And he said, so in essence, he was like a North Yorkshireman. And he said, my parents brought me up. I go to work. My wife stays at home, looks after the kids. I have my meal on the table when I get home from work. And he said, I've never actually felt about it from the other person's perspective. And he said, oh, I know, if I've got 20 odd years experience, I'm not having someone younger than me, especially a woman, telling me what's what. And then he said to me, he goes, I've got an 18-year-old daughter, and it gives the hairs on the back of my neck just sort of going off. Like, and he said, the minute I get home, I'm telling her she's sticking up for herself. And I'm not having it. This is the way it's going to be. And I said, if one person hears that and just changes the way that they are and way they act, and you just said, I just never knew. To me, that's the way it's always been, and that's the way I've been brought up. And it was interesting to me because then I thought, X years, as I sort of said at that point, I then felt like I should really think about it from that man's perspective and how he felt. And maybe he felt like he was a bit intimidated that somebody, 20 years his junior was also in the same sort of class as him, and God forbid a woman. Uh, um, but no, it's funny because I was asked once, how would I feel if I met him again? And I thought, apart from after I punched him in the face, I'm like joking. And I said, I'd
Do
probably,
it, do it.
I think I'd actually would shake him by the hand. So thank you, because you made me the person I am today.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that, and I think it's a good one to come on to. Kind of my question is like newcomer advice. So this whole webcast and web podcast, or however you want to call it, I don't know what it's actually called, glorified Zoom meeting, um, is about inspiring people who are maybe new into the profession or staying in the profession, or what keeps you here, what interests people, and why you've been in here like 25 years and more. And capturing and historically preserving the fact that you existed and that you did all these things that some people, I mean, I've got a niece who will never know what a DVD player is. It's like it just doesn't exist. So I kind of want to like take in and speak with the people who've gone before me, and celebrate you guys, basically. Sort of like, there are people that have gone before me that have broken through the glass ceiling, specifically with women, or, people who have reached places that they never realized they would be, and things like that. So, talking about sort of like newcomer advice, would you say that you take that kind of have a backbone about things? If like someone's 20 years older saying you can't do something, is that the kind of thing that you would say?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And the other thing is always put yourself forward, because you don't know where it's going to take you. I mean, a lot of my earlier opportunities just come through somebody saying, I need somebody to work on this project. I need some help. I need a volunteer to do X, Y, Z. And I didn't know what I was volunteering for. And I certainly didn't have the skills for what was to come. But I always feel like I'm constantly learning,
Mm.
always learning. And I think that's one of the things I love, is there's always something to learn. Even 20 odd years later, I'm still learning, and I love the profession that we work in. So, that whole technology, security, compliance, all of those things combined. And I just think it's a fascinating world. I really do. But I always feel like, there's people who can make or break you. And I don't even think people realize the effect they have on people by the words that they say or how they treat people. And as I was sort of saying is, I had this person at art who just made me feel I could do anything. The world was my oyster. So creative, so exciting. And then in the next breath, someone who literally shatters your dreams and drops your confidence to such a low level. And it took me years. It really took me years to build it back up again. But having built it back up again, I thought I've kind of then, you almost have to go through the bad things to kind of come out the other end, almost have some of those experiences. But then you then know what you want as much as what you don't want
Mm.
as well. So I really think there's, as I sort of said at the beginning, there's a lot of pressure for young people to have it all this, like their whole career mapped out from start to finish, and to go to university and do all these things. No, I just enjoy it. Just enjoy the experience, the opportunity. You might do something that you don't like, but there's so many other things to try. Just dip your toe in the water and see where it leads you, really.
And I very much, I didn't wake up as a child and go, I want to be a records manager. Oh.
Really? Ah.
I fell into this career purely because I hated filing. The whole point on silver filers is about people, not about filing clerks, but more about people who deal with information, which is where I've linked people like yourself in, who have primarily been in security for the most part, business continuity. It's all part of information.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, the Millennium Bug side of things. Did you say that was your craziest time?
Oh gosh, no, no. I
Oh,
mean, I always think that major incidents follow me round. Um,
say more.
so a couple of months after Thames Water, um, I really liked being within the technology environment, and I wanted to be more in with the tech. So then in 2001, I joined AXA, and I kind of pivoted from the traditional business.
Insurance.
Yeah, yeah. So they'd gone through a number of mergers and acquisitions in the late 1990s, and they had lots of disparate different IT departments, put them all together. But this is very much going from that traditional business continuity into disaster recovery. And when you were talking about old timers and that kind of thing, so this is in the era where it would take 72 hours to recover from a backup tech, and you'd have big mainframes and hundreds of tapes and all of this type of thing. But a couple of months after joining AXA, 9/11 happened. So that kind of kick-started a huge transformation program. If we actually need to get much, much quicker in recovery, and that really then started my career in terms of disaster recovery. I became the DR manager there, and then in 2005, I joined EY, Ernst and Young. But my very, very first day on the job was the London 7/7 bombings. Um,
Do
um,
Microsoft know about your track history of major incidents following behind
oh
you?
yeah. Well, the funny thing at Microsoft, I joined Microsoft a week after we went into lockdown in the UK. So, as I say, they kind of follow me around. So it's kind of like, is it fortuitous or not, or bad timing? I don't know. I always thought it's fortuitous that I just happened to be there at that point in time. And these big major incidents have been also major catalysts for change, and it's catalyst for change across at an industry level scale as well. And I think when I was, so the very first day was the London bombings, but my also first day was happened to be at a conference in Amsterdam. So they'd actually taken people out there for a couple of days for this big global conference, and the news broke halfway through the morning that this obviously major incident had happened in the UK, in London. And I think they were all into shock, and the conference was kind of stopped, and they wheeled out these big TV screens. And as you can imagine, people were trying to ring home, ring colleagues, their families, and we were just like, oh my God, we weren't expecting this to be on literally on our doorstep. But because of the magnitude of the incident, a lot of the incoming lines into the UK were closed, and a lot of the mobile phone networks in London were shut down because they weren't sure whether there were going to be subsequent bombs and those type of things. And I was kind of getting a bit lost, because if I was still at AXA, I would have had a whole crisis management situation that had kicked off. AXA's head office in the UK was very, very close to one of the tube sites where one of the bombs was. And I just didn't know what to do. So I just got the whole hold of this woman, held her hand next to me, and we were just watching it in just disbelief, really, what was going on. But then from that point forth, it then kickstarted a whole new regime of crisis management testing, and the scale of the kind of business continuity. What's the worst case scenario that we're planning for? Kind of kickstarted a lot of that. And I was doing lots of audits, lots of assessments. And that was my first real go at being an advisor, a consultant. And then 2 years later, in 2007, I actually joined Fujitsu. And that's when I went into cybersecurity. And I spent 12, 13 years at Fujitsu. And I kind of took all that business continuity, that DR, that crisis management experience, I took that into cyber. And the way I describe myself is I work on the business side of cybersecurity. So really trying to understand, what are we trying to protect and why? And that kind of, and it always comes back down to the, as you said, the information, the data, the criticality of the assets. If we have a cyber attack, what's our priorities and all of those type of things. And it's really funny to me that what I think is my uniqueness, if you like, is that always that ability to see the big picture and take a step back and see how all of these disparate areas all interconnect with each other. And I think part of that does stem back, right the way back from that level of having that creativity. Like, kept saying, think bigger, think wider. Don't be, held back. That kind of thing. And I just think that's resonated for me all the way through.
Think the entire tube map.
You're not the bit that's just held there. It carries on and on.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah,
before
and
we get out to Uxbridge, try there.
but yeah, and I just had other major incidents and things carried on, actually, while I was at AXA as well.
Of all of the major incidents that have followed you around, like a bad smell, um, which one? Which one was the one that was the most kind of impactful to you?
I always say 2009 was my year of crisis, because I had three major incidents on the bounce. And the first of which really tested me, was actually one of the biggest corporate frauds in history. And it was one of our IT service provider partners in India, a company called Satyam. They don't actually exist anymore. But at the time, I was actually working on a global account for one of our financial services customers, and we were building out all these global data centers and service desks. And Satyam provided the remote infrastructure management of all of the data centers. And it transpired that the CEO and CFO had been overinflating their books. And and it was a kind of like, so if the business looked better than it was, they would attract customers, bigger customers, and those type of things. And it just kind of spiraled out of control. So when the news broke that they had this big fraud, the middle management kind of like, oh, we didn't know, and they were communicating with us and those type of things. And then suddenly the communication started to stop. It just stopped. And we said, now we've got to figure out how to take on a global service without any staff, without any procedures, without any, and we've got to do it legally, and make sure there's no impact to the customer, all at the same time. So we were actually locked in a basement in Fujitsu's head office for 8 weeks to come up with this entire transformation plan, and to bring all these people in. We had program managers, lawyers, and all of these type of things. And I sort of say, locked in the basement. I'm like, yeah, we were actually locked in the basement, not literally locked in, but they had a big office in the basement with no windows. So you really didn't know what time of day it was or anything. And you just had everyone confined together. But it sounds like a bit of a cliche, but it was that really thinking outside of the box type of thing, because it was that realization about how much trust you put into service providers. And because you do, that's what you do. You kind of outsource a lot of these things. But there was that realization that Satyam could actually lock us out of our own network. And we were like, how did that happen?
Yeah,
And so we were sort of like,
the
and
power
we got to the
imbalance.
point, yeah, and we got to the point where we're literally going to have to start pulling network cables out of servers out the back so we can get control of the network. And even like one of the HR managers, his wife was Indian, and we were saying, we might even have to go to India and put out literally big signs outside their office and say, did you used to work on this account? Literally walk down the road and we'll give you a job. And we were just thinking about all of these different ways and means and how we were going to do that. And I think and it was just like that at the very last minute, we were about to pull the plug and have to take on this service and everything else. Another company in India come in and brought Satyam out. But I think for me, that was probably the most intense, of just literally being back to back to back all the time and just dealing with so many unknowns. It was there'd been no precedent before that. And then the second major incident, ironically, was the last global pandemic, H1N1, swine flu.
Oh,
There hadn't been a global pandemic until that point, and not since many moons before. And again, taking on a global service, we're just like, oh God, not again. But the interesting thing was, from that perspective, was, as we're seeing now, is if government takes a decision to close buildings, to shut down transport, all of these things, there's not a lot you can do. And one of the things that happened at the time was in Malaysia, which is where one of the global service desks was. So they were doing like a follow the sun service desk. So this was the entirety of the Asia Pacific service desk. And the very, very first case of swine flu in that building, the Malaysian government just shut it down. And we lost our Asian service desk overnight and
wow.
lost all the languages that service desk. So all the Chinese, the Japanese, all of those languages went. So, and then the third one, just to round that off for that year, was industrial action. So Fujitsu had actually made a number of people redundant in that year, and we were concerned about unions going on strike and all of that kind of thing, people not turning up for work. How are we going to manage all of those things? So I've been on the front line of quite a lot of major incidents.
Yeah, I mean, I what's going through my head at the minute was not necessarily I wasn't working, but I when we had the bird flu pandemic, I got bird flu. Um,
Really?
yeah, and I was very very poorly. Um, and I just think to myself, if this was anything like what I would have felt like with COVID, then I don't want to be part of it. Like, no, thank you, because bird flu was bad. And it's that whole scenario of like, well, what's the difference between cold and flu? Well, the flu, you can wave 500 quid at the end of my bed and I wouldn't lift my head. So like you could, in fact, you could have held probably a million and I'd gone, no, I'm all right, tar. Um, so
Really?
yeah. But in terms of working life, you remind me of working in Birmingham and the office being very close to a central network of the train stations and everything. So we had to have bomb disposal practices, and we had to learn about the sniper attack and stuff like that. They walk into the building and walking around with a gun, and like I'm learning how to crawl, commando crawl, kind of along the floor, and so like, this is mental. What part of information and records management includes crawling on my elbows on the office floor? Like, no. And yeah, just kind of having to work out. And the organisation I was working for was on like the 17th and 18th floor of a building. And I tell you what, when the fire alarm went off, your calves hurt the next day.
Wow.
I happened to be in the London office when it went off twice in one day, and I was like, because they went down, and then about a few hours later got back in, then it went off again, and they were like, oh, for God's sake. So I missed out on that one. But yeah, 18 floors down, so whatever 2 times 18 is, I can't do the math. 36?
36.
36 floors. Um, and God, imagine your calves the next day. Um, but yeah, disaster recovery and business continuity is probably one of, I think, the most fascinating parts of information. Remembering that information is the lifeblood of most organizations. So I mean, I could sit and talk to you about all these forever in a day, and perhaps it's worth another session another time. But kind of focusing back on you. Um, so your newcomer advice we talked about already. Would you say you've ever made a bad mistake in your career that you thought, oh my God, I just imploded my entire career? Um,
Um, yeah, yeah. I think I kind of always sort of say I'm always challenging the status quo, and some people don't like to be challenged. Let's say, and I always kind of one of those annoying people that always like why, but why, and like because that's the way it's always been. Yeah, but why? And there's got to be better ways of doing things, and I think that's for me. It's always around. And I think that's just what it's sort of saying is I kind of think I'm like at heart I'm a bit of a problem solver, and I just kind of think there's better ways of doing, where's the opportunities to keep improving and doing these things. But some people do get stuck in their ways, let's say, and they're wedded to a particular process or way of doing things. And I felt probably in the past I haven't handled myself as well as I should have done in certain situations where I've over challenged, let's say, and it's not gone down too well. So I've had to really think about what I say and how I say it.
not always what you say, it's how you say it that kind of like
Yeah,
tactical solutions. I am the least tactical person ever. I'm very much, I have been called a force of nature, and I actually only learned recently that that's not a good thing.
I think as well. I find when you're a woman, you get called like emotional when actually you're passionate. You know these type of things, and I remember I used to get told when I was told head mistress Sarah's getting a red pen out again, and because I used to review. I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I like things done a certain way. And for a long time, my mantra is do it right, do it properly, do it first time. And I think it's a job worth doing, do it right, as I kind of sort of saying. So I'd be very overly critical of people and what they were doing, how they were writing things. And I'd be like, the worst person to ask me to critique something is me, because I will actually critique it. And that's why people said I'm like a headmistress getting my red pen out. I must try harder, B minus and that kind of thing. But for me, it's just always about, as I say, just do it properly. If you're going to do it, and that's why I've always kind of held myself and my team and those people, if anyone who's worked with me, to a very, very high level, because I think there's an expectation that, as I say, if you're going to do it right, do it properly, do it first time.
So you're coming out with these kind of sayings, but has that come from someone else? Like, have you had like someone to look up to, or is there a specific person in your career that you've gone, I want to be just like them? Um,
I think there's probably various different peoples at different points in my career.
Can you
Really.
care to talk about them and like about what they did to kind of in enlighten your thoughts and infuse you?
Well, as I sort of say, I always sort of stem back to my art teacher. But as I kind of gone through, I've looked up to. I mean, I think at Fujitsu, we had a female CEO, and she was just amazing. And I just found she was so interesting, so down to earth. And I remember someone saying to her once, how, because she had a child with cerebral palsy, and someone said to her, how does it feel to have a child that's different? And she turned around and said, we're all different. And I just like, that's just amazing, because they were like, oh my God, you're a woman CEO, and you've got 3 kids, and you've got a child with cerebral palsy. And she was like, would you be asking a man that?
Oh, yeah, good point. Yeah.
And I just like, so I think I've looked up to powerful, authoritative figures, those type of things, and those type of role models. And I wouldn't sort of say there's one individual per se. There's just a myriad of those type of individuals. But I've also looked at people that really have turned me off, and so those kind of people who, just like say, the bullies, and the people who don't help, they kind of step on people on the way up, and those type of things. um, but I think there's just those powerful, strong role models of people I look up to.
I remember I did a presentation once and I got told that I was embarrassing and that what I talked about, I didn't deserve to sit and talk about those kind of things. And I then later on, I got asked to do a presentation again, the same presentation elsewhere. And I was absolutely terrified having received this feedback. I was like, I'm not sure I want to do this. Like, I can't go through that whole stress again, like of being told that, I'm bigger than my boots and all this kind of stuff. And afterwards, I got the feedback to say that they had done a inspirational wall of people who inspired them, and they were listing like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Michelle Obama, people like this, and I was on that board, and I was just like, "You're shitting me! What? Like, I don't deserve to be up there with those people. What are you talking about?" I was so flattered, and I was just like, "This is mental." Um,
Amazing.
and I was just like, there's so many people I could put way ahead of me. Like, no, 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 don't stop looking at me. Go and look at these people. Um, but I just kind of like, someone obviously felt that I gave them the inspiration for something, and they felt that they wanted to put it. And I think I'm doing them a disservice or disjustice by saying, no, 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 not me, because they obviously felt that way. And I think recognizing sort of like you can be inspirational without being kind of someone that would necessarily think that about it. So it's that whole, like, people call you an expert, and it's like, I'm not an expert. Um, is you can accept that kind of compliment and be okay about
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
and not go too
exactly.
much to your head.
I think it's I mean, I remember being as I say, I spent a long time being a consultant in an advisory position. And it's very much, sometimes as a consulting, it's do as I say, not as I do. It's very easy to kind of sit there on your pedestal and go, oh, you need to do better. And you come along and look and critique people's processes and this, that, and the other. But I was just like, but I've walked the walk. I've been where you are, and I talk from experience. And I felt like, as you sort of said, is if you're going to be in that environment, you need to talk from a position of authority and experience and knowledge and all of these type of things. So I've worked really, really hard to gain that knowledge and understanding and continuous learning, speaking to peers, customers, partners, and just carry on learning and asking all the questions, really. And I just remember sort of, even when I was in disaster recovery way back when, I remember just sitting on the floor of a really cold data center at 3 in the morning, feeding, one of the engineers backup tapes. But I'm just asking, and it's a really boring, laborious,
Eating
horrible.
sandwiches, then I was like,
Why do I have to be the person to get the pizzas in and then get the beers in at the end of the test and that kind of thing? So, because I was that kind of the person coordinating everything. But my way of learning was watching them and talking to them. And I was like, okay, so show me what you do and how you do it and those type of things. And over time, I just learned to speak the language of business and IT people. And I always sort of say I've been in that kind of middleman, middle woman perspective, because I find a lot of people, technology and business people, wind each other up, and they just clash with each other all the time. And I said, that's because you're at polar opposites. You kind of need to come together. And I just felt like I was just able to sort of bring things down into a talk from a business perspective, business language, and put it into a way that both parties could understand and both parties could actually come together.
That's
Um,
something that I kind of ended up in the role of. So I'm very excited that you're talking about this because I was in IT role. Well, the team, I was the only girl in the team, kind of, and I was that translator between IT and the business. And it's like the business would say, "Oh, I want to be able to do this, this, and this," and it's like, "Okay, so what do you think?" And they'd like, and then I go, "He says no." Um, but if you give him an extra few weeks, then and a bacon butty, he might do it. So yeah. What would you say has kept you going?
Uh, I just do you know what? I just love working with tech and technology. I just think there's so much opportunity, so many things to learn. I think I've always been in my element as well, when really been on the front line in a crisis. But I'm a kind of like I'm a very annoying person because not only am I a perfectionist, I challenge, I'm also an internal optimist as well. So I think
Okay.
no matter how bad it gets, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. It's I think of like, oh, what can we take from this? What's the opportunity? Again, how can we do better? What can we learn from this? What we're going to do next time? And so I think it's like, even when you have all these massive, big crisis situations, and even like the pandemic, I'm just sitting going, right, what happens next? Now what? Like, what can we learn? What can we do better? And that for me is the bit I love doing. It's that kind of like, taking it to the next level, and not just, as you say, just accepting the way it is and those type of things. But it's that constant challenging, do it in a better way than I used to do it. But I just think it's such a fascinating area to work in. And one of the areas I'm thinking about as well is with regards to like artificial intelligence, but true artificial intelligence, the cognitive intelligence, robotics, what's coming next. There's a real concern. People they're not going to have jobs anymore because everything's going to be automated and run by robot. That's not the case at all. But there's a whole load of things around ethics and those type of things, and that's the bit that I like to think about. I know it sounds a bit, I keep saying it, but it kind of comes back to that big picture way of thinking,
Mm.
and that kind of tech for social good. That's one of the areas that I'm really fascinated by.
Um, that it's kind of we will find when I'm doing these interviews with people is that there is something that specifically just keeps that kind of that inner treadmill going and sort of like fascinating. And I find it with records management is that I bloody love it. I can't quite tell you why.
I think it's really dull. I'm just like, it's not. I love it. I just think it's such a brilliant area to work in. But I even think around, the cybersecurity, the privacy, the data protection. I remember because when GDPR first came out, so we were going 2016, and then the lead up to that. I just remember talking to so many different companies with regards to their whole data strategy and the fact they'd been hoarding data because they could.
Mm.
And just some of the conversations that we've been having, and that was actually your downfall, because if you have a data breach or some kind of cyber attack, you're going to have to answer for yourself. You're going to have to kind of explain to the customers and regulators why you've got all this data and why you haven't been managing it effectively. But it was way back then. It was just a case of add more storage, just keep adding to it. They had no clue what data they had or why they had it.
And there's still people running on tape now.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I just remember talking to a local authority way back when, and it was kind of like they had to hold information on every single citizen that had ever lived in this city, and even if they were, and then companies and this, that, and the other. And they said they had to collect information as mundane as my bin wasn't collected on time, right through to social services, children being taken into care, and those type of things. And there was that, and they just said they had 20 years of data, all on their production environment, everything. And they just like, we just add more storage, and I'm just like going, oh my god.
um,
um,
everything information wise, it just fascinates me. Like my first job, I was a modern apprentice, working for a city council, and the city of Lincoln can be thankful for the wheelie bin size they've got was down to me. because I was given A0 maps and a bunch of information from the estates officers that had suggested what bin could fit there. And they gave it to me, and I highlighted the A0 maps either the yellow or pink, dependent on what size bin it was that they needed in that street. And those maps were what the dustbin guys followed.
Wow.
And it's just like the the bins back home in Lincoln. It's just they're me. It was me that did it.
To the bin men and go, see that? That's me, that is. And they're like,
I mean,
thank
the
you.
estate officers decided the size, but I could have changed it very easily with using my yellow and pink highlighter. So yeah, everything information. There is always something, and I see the news and I go, "There's information in that." I tell you, there's something not quite right there.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
information is at the core of it.
It's interesting, like you were saying, is I mean, even like from like being at Microsoft, and it's like, what are the attackers after? They're after the information. And that's the core to everything, really. Is we spend a lot of time securing infrastructure, but actually when you think about ransomware and you think about a lot of these type of attacks, and we've seen nation states or espionage, it's about the data, and the value of that data has a value to anybody and everybody, depending on what the motivation is behind it. But yeah, the data to me is the bit that I find really interesting. But the other point as well, that I used to always sort of have to keep reminding people, is there are real people at the end of these records, and I think it's really easy sometimes we think about like cybersecurity and data breaches as being a bit of a victimless crime, when we sort of say, oh well, millions of records. But these records relate to people, and there's a real impact to those people. But because it's not a violent crime, you don't kind of see them as a victim at the end of it. So I have to kind of reminding people about what it is we're actually doing and why.
Yeah, very much so. And the reason I said that I hang around in information security is because you guys are interested in keeping secure the thing that I'm interested in, information. So that's why I hang around the places that I do, and that's why we've met. Um, we're soon wrapping this up, but I wanted to ask you a couple of hopefully easy questions, maybe silly. But if you had kind of like a book or anything to recommend to anybody, perhaps for disaster recovery or business continuity, that you would say it's the book that you would point them to? It can be more than one if you can't think of just one. But would be good to know if there's a book or something people could pick up and go.
Oh gosh, that's a hard one.
So much for easy questions. Sorry about that.
Oh, it's not one that springs to mind. I think one of the things that I've learned really, for as we're sort of saying, is about, it's not what you say necessarily, it's how you say it. There's a book, and I will actually send you the link if you wanted to put it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But it's about speaking with gravitas, and it's just giving you the opportunity to step back and look at how you're perceived and how people perceive your message, and have they took it the way that it was intended. And that's really made me change my perspective on, as I say, what I say, and the impact I want to have on people, and the things that I want them to take away.
Hmm, very much so. And that's really appreciated. It doesn't have to be specifically, like I say, topical as such, but I think for newcomers into the industry as well, and like learning how to improve is really important, and never stop learning. So that's a really useful book and I will put a link in the comments below. Um, the just kind of quickly checking down my list of questions. If you were stranded on an island, what's the one thing that you'd take with you?
Dogs.
And you've got two dogs, I
I love
think.
dogs. I love my dogs. Yeah, I don't have any children, so my dogs are my babies.
They're Weimaraners, aren't they?
Weimaranas, yeah,
The ones
yeah.
that like to travel on private jet.
Very highly strung, a bit like me. Yeah.
Like, forget the husband, take the dogs.
Yeah.
And lastly, this is a really silly one: is carrot for a nose or lettuce for ears?
Carrot for nose,
But why?
because I always think of snowmen and carrots. I don't have a logical reason other than that, really.
Feel like an Olaf thing going on here.
Yeah, cute.
Um, it's It's been an absolute pleasure, Sarah, and I just want to say thank you very much for coming and joining me on Silver Filers. In terms of what next is for Sarah, then it doesn't sound like you're going to be giving up anytime soon. So I look forward to kind of watching your career keep going, really.
More
Uh,
of the same, but
yeah,
yeah.
more the same but bigger. And hopefully you'll get to actually meet your colleagues one day.
Oh, well, yeah, yeah. Well, hopefully that's next on the list. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, and you take care of yourself. But as to our watchers, thanks very much for listening. Like and subscribe this video to be able to and subscribe to this channel to be able to get a notification of the next video coming up, and more of wonderful people like Sarah to come. So thanks very much, everyone, and bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.